Before you trust your next first impression, there's something you should know. The person you think you're reading may not be the person your brain is reacting to. Think about the last stranger you met. Within seconds, you probably decided, they seem trustworthy, something feels off, I like them. Or maybe, I don't know why, but I don't trust them. Here's the strange part. At that moment, they hadn't said a single word. You didn't know their past, their values, their intentions. Yet, somehow, your brain had already reached a conclusion. How? Was it intuition, body language, instinct? Or was your brain quietly inventing a story and convincing you it was the truth? Because psychologists have discovered something deeply unsettling. Your first impression isn't always a photograph of reality. Sometimes, it's a reflection of your own past, the experiences you've lived, the people you've trusted, the people who hurt you, the patterns your brain learned long before this moment. And all of it can shape the person you believe you're seeing. So tonight, we're opening a psychological case file. One question, one mystery, one invisible force that quietly shapes every friendship, every interview, every relationship, and every person you'll ever meet. Can you really read someone in seconds? Or have you been reading your own mind all along? Every mystery begins with a suspect. And in this case, the obvious suspect is body language. You've probably heard the rules before. If someone avoids eye contact, they're hiding something. If they cross their arms, they're being defensive. If they smile, they're friendly. It sounds convincing, almost too convincing. Because if reading people were really that simple, why do intelligent people get manipulated? Why do experienced interviewers hire the wrong candidate? Why do countless victims describe con artists as charming, confident? Someone I trusted immediately. Something doesn't add up. Imagine meeting two strangers. The first smiles warmly, looks directly into your eyes, speaks with confidence, and makes you feel comfortable almost instantly. The second seems quiet, avoids eye contact, speaks slowly, appears nervous. Most people would reach the same conclusion. The first person feels trustworthy. The second doesn't. But what if the first person has simply mastered the appearance of trust? And what if the second person is simply anxious? Suddenly, the exact same behavior tells two completely different stories. And that's where this mystery becomes far more interesting. Because behavior doesn't come with subtitles. A smile doesn't explain itself. Silence doesn't explain itself. Eye contact doesn't explain itself. The exact same action can mean completely different things. A person might avoid eye contact because they're lying, or because they're shy, or because they're overwhelmed, or because that's simply how they were raised. The behavior is identical. The reason isn't. And that's the first real crack in the case. Body language can offer clues, but clues are not conclusions. The moment you mistake a clue for certainty, your brain quietly begins writing the rest of the story, not from evidence, but from assumption. If you've ever believed you could understand someone from a single gesture, your mind may have been doing something remarkably human. It filled in the missing pieces with a story that felt true, which raises an even bigger question. If body language isn't making these instant judgments, then what is? To answer that, we have to look somewhere far more mysterious. Not at the person standing in front of you, but at the machine, silently interpreting them. Your brain. For a moment, forget everything you've heard about body language, because the biggest clue in this investigation was never standing in front of you. It has been sitting inside your own mind. Imagine walking through a forest 10,000 years ago. The bushes suddenly move. You have less than a second to decide. Is it the wind or a predator? If you stop to carefully analyze every possibility, you might already be dead. So evolution built something extraordinary, a brain that predicts before it proves. Long before your conscious mind catches up, your brain is already asking one question. Have I seen something like this before? Not because it wants to be right, because it wants to keep you alive. In many ways, your brain is less like a camera recording reality and more like a detective solving a case. A detective never begins with all the evidence. It begins with a theory. Then it starts looking for clues that seem to confirm it. That's why two people can meet the exact same stranger and walk away with completely different first impressions, not because the stranger changed, but because the detectives inside their minds started with different theories. Psychologists call part of this remarkable ability thin slicing. Research has shown that the human brain can sometimes form surprisingly accurate impressions after observing only a few seconds of behavior. At first, that sounds almost impossible. Could your brain really understand someone that quickly? The answer is both yes and no. Sometimes those rapid judgments are remarkably accurate, especially when you're noticing broad patterns like confidence, emotional tone, or social engagement. But here's the problem. Your brain doesn't attach a warning label to its predictions. It never says, this judgment is only 50% reliable. Instead, it gives you something much more convincing: certainty. And that's where the illusion begins. The feeling of certainty isn't evidence that you're right. It's only evidence that your brain has finished writing its first draft. And first drafts are often wrong. Which leads us to the biggest discovery in this entire investigation. What if your brain isn't simply analyzing the person standing in front of you? What if it's comparing them to someone you met years ago? Because if that's true, then every stranger you meet may already be carrying the shadow of someone from your past. Imagine meeting someone for the very first time. To you, they're a stranger, but to your brain, they're a comparison. Before you're even aware of it, your mind begins searching through years of memories, faces, voices, expressions, moments you thought you'd forgotten. Not because your brain enjoys living in the past, but because the past is the only evidence it already has. Every new person is quietly measured against the people who came before them. Do they smile like someone you once trusted? Do they speak like someone who once hurt you? Do they remind you of a parent, a teacher, an old friend, or someone you spent years trying to forget? Most of this happens without your awareness, and that's exactly what makes it so powerful. Because you're never just seeing the person standing in front of you. You're also seeing the echoes of everyone who came before them. Psychologists call one part of this process confirmation bias. Once your brain forms an early belief, it naturally begins searching for evidence that supports it, while quietly overlooking the evidence that doesn't. Imagine you decide within seconds, this person seems arrogant. Now watch what happens. Every confident sentence becomes evidence. Every mistake feels expected. Every moment of silence suddenly means something. The conclusion came first. The evidence followed. Not because your brain wants to deceive you, but because uncertainty is expensive and certainty feels safe. Your mind would rather tell a quick story than admit it doesn't know. Now imagine something even more unsettling. How many genuinely kind people have you kept at a distance, simply because they reminded you of someone who wasn't? How many honest people were never given the chance to prove your first impression wrong? And perhaps the hardest question of all, how many people have misunderstood you for exactly the same reason? Maybe they never really saw you. Maybe they only saw someone you accidentally reminded them of. Suddenly, this investigation isn't about reading strangers anymore. It's about realizing that every human being walks into every conversation carrying invisible memories. Some memories protect us, some mislead us, and unless we become aware of them, we may spend our lives confusing old stories with new people. So if body language isn't the answer, and memory isn't the whole answer either, what actually separates a careful observer from someone who simply trusts their first impression? That's where our investigation takes its most surprising turn. At this point, the mystery has changed. We no longer want to know how to read people faster. We want to know how to read them more accurately. And surprisingly, those are not the same thing. Imagine two detectives arriving at the same crime scene. The first looks around for 10 seconds, points to a suspect, and confidently says, "Case closed." The second detective does something very different. He waits. He asks questions. He looks for patterns. Most importantly, he searches for evidence that challenges his first theory. Which detective would you trust? Your brain usually behaves like the first one. It loves quick answers because uncertainty feels uncomfortable. But the best observers learn to think like the second detective. Instead of asking, "What does this one gesture mean?" they ask, "What story does this behavior tell?" Over time, Because behavior is like a single frame from a movie. One frame can be misleading. A full sequence reveals the plot. That's why psychologists and behavioral investigators rarely rely on isolated signals. One crossed arm doesn't reveal a personality. One nervous smile doesn't reveal deception. One moment of silence doesn't reveal guilt. Context matters. Patterns matter. Change over time matters. The question isn't, what did they do? The better question is this normal for them? Because every person has a baseline. Some people naturally avoid eye contact. Some speak with their hands. Some laugh when they're nervous. Others become completely silent. Without knowing what's normal, it's almost impossible to recognize what's unusual. And then comes the habit that separates careful observers from everyone else. They don't fall in love with their first impression. They actively search for evidence that proves it wrong because they understand something most of us forget. The goal isn't to be right. The goal is to see clearly. And sometimes, seeing clearly begins the moment you're willing to say, maybe my first impression was incomplete, because the greatest observers aren't the people who judge the fastest. They're the people who are least afraid to change their minds. Which brings us back to the question that started this investigation. If your first impression isn't always the truth, then what can you actually trust? Let's return to where this investigation began. Imagine walking into that same room again. The same strangers, the same faces, the same silent first impressions. Nothing around you has changed, but something inside you has. This time, when your mind whispers, they seem trustworthy, or something feels off, you don't rush to believe it. You pause, you become curious, and you ask yourself, am I seeing this person, or am I seeing the story my brain has already begun to write? Because that's the greatest discovery this investigation has uncovered. Your first impression isn't your enemy. In many ways, it's one of the most remarkable abilities your brain has ever developed. It helps you make sense of uncertainty. It allows you to react long before conscious thought catches up. Sometimes it protects you. Sometimes it guides you. But it is never the whole story. The danger isn't having a first impression. The danger is mistaking it for the truth. Every person you meet is more complex than your first glance can ever reveal. And so are you. Some people will judge you before they discover your kindness. Others before they understand your fears. Some will mistake your silence for arrogance, your confidence for ego, your caution for dishonesty. Not because they truly see you, but because they're seeing you through the lens of their own memories, just as you've done with others. Maybe that's what wisdom really is. Not the ability to read people instantly, but the humility to recognize how much you still don't know, to leave room for someone to surprise you, to let evidence replace assumption, to choose curiosity over certainty, because the clearest minds aren't the ones that reach conclusions the fastest. They're the ones that stay open long enough for the truth to reveal itself. So, can you really read someone in seconds? Perhaps, sometimes. But maybe that was never the right question. The better question is this: can you recognize the moment you stop reading the person in front of you and start reading the story inside your own mind? Because the moment you learn that difference, you don't just become better at understanding other people. You become better at understanding yourself. And in the end, that may be the most important person you will ever learn to read. Thank you for watching. And until next time, stay curious.